distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, Mrs. Annie Boochever. Annie Boochever is the award-winning author of the books Bristol Bay Summer and Alaska Civil Rights hero Elizabeth Peratrovich, Fighter in Velvet Gloves, which tells the story of Elizabeth Peratrovich, Tlingit Civil Rights leader. Ms. Boochever also authored a new play, which will be performed by the middle school tonight at 6:30 in the elementary gym. Please help me welcome Ms. Boochever.
Thank you, Ms. Boren. It is indeed a treat to be in Haines. I actually spent quite a bit of time as a child in Haines. I used to go to the Rainbow Glacier Girl Scout Camp. I had a job once in Haines, so it's a little bit like coming back home, and it is so gorgeous here, and I love all the snow, and I love working with all the students. I want to especially thank also Deb Kemp and A&S Camp 5 for inviting me here, the Haines School District, and Natalie Benassi for coordinating my visit and taking on the task of directing this Reader's Theater play that I wrote. But as you know, Elizabeth Peratrovich was a Tlingit woman from the Raven Moiety, and it is the custom in the Tlingit way to begin a speech with a formal introduction. I was a classroom music teacher and librarian for many years in Juneau, and I often invited Tlingit elders into my classroom with the help of the Indian Studies program, and they would share their stories and songs, and I especially loved it when they spoke their language. When the university finally offered a Tlingit language class, I got up the courage to sign up, and this is what I remember for how to introduce myself. Cha ade yechat ni'u, hesh ayak yuk ak detani. Tlingit ianach, shawat ad shiki yuchat duasak. Kleika ianach, Annie Boochever yuchat duasak. Kleit Shawatna Ayahat. And did I say Gunashish? And Yak-e Ixwatini. So I said, hello. Thank you. I said, welcome. I said, please pardon me if I don't say all my words exactly right. And my Tlingit name was just given to me for the purposes of the class. It was Shawat Adshiki, which means music woman, because I was a music teacher. And when asked to give my clan, the best I could do was Kleit Shawat, which is white woman, Caucasian. Anyway, I would like to begin. In 1988, then Governor of Alaska, Steve Cooper, proclaimed February 16th, this day today, Elizabeth Peratrovich Day all over the state. For the past 35 years, her life and those celebrations of it just get bigger and better, from parades to school plays to speeches and especially Reader's Theater plays and school assemblies, just like the one that we are having right now. Those celebrations of her life continue. So I think it's important to know about who was Elizabeth Peratrovich and why is she so famous? Why is she so important? Those are the questions that inspired me to write a book about her with her only living son, Roy Peratrovich Jr. Roy would have been thrilled to be here today and see all of you honoring his mother, but he is almost 90 years old now and can no longer travel. But I will never be able to talk about his parents without feeling his presence. So to answer those questions for you, who was Elizabeth Peratrovich and how and why did she become so famous, We must understand, and I think many of you do, that for untold centuries, indigenous people made up the entire area that we now call Alaska, this wild frontier full of rich natural resources. Since their first exposure to Europeans, these original cultures have reeled under wave after wave of outsiders, most all of whom wanted either to save their souls, which they had not asked for, or get at their wealth, which they had not offered. Over time, it became more and more evident. I have to just check here. Yes, these outsiders became very persistent. And finally, in 1867, United States Secretary of State William H. Seward orchestrated the purchase of Alaska from Russia. Does anybody know how much the United States government paid for this big state? Yes. Oh, he's right on. $7.2 million, or just 2 cents an acre. But of course, the Russians were selling something that they didn't really own. And that fact was not lost on Elizabeth or other Alaska Native leaders. Well, from the time of Seward's big real estate deal to 1911, the year that Elizabeth was born, that percentage of Alaska Natives went from about 95% to just 50%. But more than that, their rights, the right to hunt and fish on their own land, to speak their own language, to raise their children as they saw fit, were largely ignored or trampled. As Alaska has grown, that percentage has dropped to just 16%. But I'm happy to say their status has changed dramatically. The majority of the largest companies in Alaska are owned by Alaska Native people. Members of 228 federally recognized tribes manage the largest system of tribal health organizations in the nation. Extensive networks of Native-run institutions preserve and celebrate Alaska's indigenous cultures. And finally, dozens of policy and education organizations protect and advance Alaska Native people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. None of that existed when Elizabeth was born. It was her generation of Alaska Native leaders that planted the seed for a civil rights revolution with their personal courage and commitment. Elizabeth herself spent her entire adult life fighting for the rights of her people. She is probably most famous today for the powerful testimony she delivered before an all-white male territorial Senate. Her words drew applause and tears and culminated in the passage of an anti-discrimination bill that was the first significant, lasting civil rights legislation in the nation. It would take almost 20 more years for President Lyndon Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I'd like to read to you what Roy Peratrovich Jr. said about his mother when he wrote the prologue to our book. I am the last remaining of Roy and Elizabeth Peratrovich's 3 children. This story includes personal details about my mother and our family that I have provided based on our family records and my personal recollections. In collaborating with the author, it was my hope to give the reader insight into not just the accomplishments of my mother, but into who she was as a person. Stella Martin Yan Dayin called my mother a fighter with velvet gloves. Stella was a Tlingit Indian from Cake. She was a champion of equal rights and a woman of great accomplishment herself. She was also a good friend of Mom's, and I think she got it right. When it came to fairness, justice, and the Alaska Native people, my mother was determined to stand her ground, but she would always do it with grace and dignity. This is the story of how my mother came to give a speech that helped Alaska lead all of America in the battle for civil rights. So, it is my hope that this book will inspire young readers just like you to take up that torch that Elizabeth lit all those years ago for the most important right in Alaska or anywhere, the right embodied in the spirits of both Elizabeth and her husband Roy, the right to equal treatment under the law. And now, I want to tell you a little bit about this play that you're going to see. This book has been read all over the state, and many teachers and librarians that have read it have written me and encouraged me to write another book about her, but for younger kids. This one is more for middle school, high school, and adults. So I have been working on that, and I completed my manuscript this last year, and when Deb and Natalie asked me to come, they really wanted me to bring or to send them a play about Elizabeth Peratrovich. I didn't really have one, but I thought I could adapt my manuscript, the new one, into a reader's theater. I chose that format because there's so much information to give, and because it might be a little easier for teachers to produce than a real full-blown play. So, I have been very impressed with the mostly fifth graders, I think, who have been working on this play with Natalie Benassi as their director. I didn't want to introduce them just as the middle school kids who did this play. I wanted to give them a name. So you guys, here's your name. They are the Equality for All Actors. And I would now like to introduce them and have them come up and take their places.